Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy and Kurt Leavins. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, David. Hi, Kurt.
Hello.
Great to have both of you here tonight. It's always a treat when the three of
It's
us
always
get
fun.
together. Indeed. All right. Tonight we're looking both back and forward, mainly back, but a little bit forward. And to the Oilers' loss to Vegas in the playoffs and forward to the next season. And we'll do our traditional two good things, two bad things, and two numbers podcast. But because there's three of us, that'll be three good things, three bad things, and three numbers. Kurt, why don't you, Kurt, why don't you start it off with your good thing?
Well, my good thing is really a reference to how far the Oilers have come as a competitive team and their path in the future. And so my good thing is the age and contract status of the core of the team. I don't think it is a surprise to anybody that I believe that the Oilers still, even though they're out of the playoffs, I still think they have the two best players in the game. And I think they have a core that is strong and together for at least a few more years going forward, in which they can work around this core to take the steps required to get to the promised land, which of course is the Stanley Cup. If you look at a couple other, Canadian teams, neither Vancouver or Montreal have a measurable core at this point. I would argue that Winnipeg had a core, and it has been slowly peeled away the last couple of years, and will probably do more of that again this summer. And Calgary's core didn't want to play there anymore, and they left.
Ouch.
And so what we really have is we're really down to two Canadian teams now, and the Maple Leafs core has been knocking on the door long enough for them to consider breaking that core up. At this point in time, they've reached the determination, you know what? We've tried everything else. Maybe this isn't the right core to get us to the promised land. And I think if they keep the same GM that they have had, I think there's going to be big change in that core. The one Canadian team that doesn't have to worry about its core are the Oilers. What I argue is why they are not still going is that there were too many little mistakes that happened against really good hockey teams. And when you go down to 16 teams, then when you go down to 8 teams, and when you go down to 4 teams, every little mistake you make is magnified because the opposition that's waiting for you is that much better equipped to pounce.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that this core is still of very high quality and is still under contract for years to come gives me confidence that this was a progression, even though we went a series shorter than we did last year, and that they're poised to recoup that plus some next year. That's what I maintain. The core is here, and it's Edmonton's for the next couple of years. We're in far better shape than any other Canadian franchise that you can look at.
Kurt, I think you spoke well there. I'm going to make 3 points about what you said. First of all, I agree. Like Calgary and Vancouver have a little trouble because two players that they hope to build around, JT Miller and Jonathan Huberdeau, are on absolutely massive contracts, but they had really poor seasons. And man, that's a scary thing for any franchise when you start to get players earning a huge amount of money. I think actually Huberdeau's just starting his contract this coming season.
Nazem Kadri, the other one?
Yeah, and Kadri, and then JT Miller in Vancouver. Okay. Yeah, that's the other guy I'm referencing. Although Kadri, I'm not as sure about how Kadri's year went because he's a little bit different kind of player. You just don't rate him on his scoring. He's kind of a enforcer, glue player as well. The other in Toronto, I agree. Like they seem to be talking about maybe getting rid of John Tavares. He's getting a lot of criticism. I never liked that. I thought that was a mistake when they went for Tavares initially. I mean, I'm not always right about these things. I'm often wrong, especially teams that I don't follow that closely. But I didn't like that move. I just thought, wow, you are tying so much cap space up in that player. And is that really the right thing when you have something good going here with all these young guys? But the third thing is you just compared the Oilers to all the Canadian teams. Ain't no Canadian teams left in the playoffs right now.
Oh, sure.
And the cores we have to worry about aren't just in Canada there. And I know that you're thinking this and you know this, but the point I make, like, yes, the Oilers have a good core, but man, some of these other US teams, so do they. There's a lot of wicked competition for the Oilers. The Colorado core is still amazing. It was such a gift to the Oilers when Colorado got eliminated this year. It just opened the door so wide, not to have to go through that team, which is an excellent team and had some bad injuries this year. Maybe will next year too. But it's going to be, I don't know, like, I don't know if it feels this way to you, but like when the Oilers were winning in the 80s, had such a dominant team, it seemed like there was such a gap between Edmonton and the vast majority of teams in the NHL. And I think this is true, that you were just able, just by luck or by the salary cap structure, the NHL's contract structure, you were able to bring together all this incredible talent and keep it together by chance on one or two or three teams in the NHL at that time. There wasn't as much competition. Now it looks like there's going to be 8 teams at least any year who are going to just challenge the Oilers like nobody's business for the Stanley Cup every single season. It's going to be brutal, the playoffs. It's going to be really hard. And I think when Ken Holland talked about you just want to keep making the playoffs to give yourself that chance, that one more chance. This is the new NHL, where you're just hoping to make the playoffs year after year after year to give yourself that chance, because there is no team, as the Boston Bruins will tell you right now, it could be considered a favorite to win the Cup, and that includes the Edmonton Oilers. I think I was overly optimistic, obviously, in my enthusiasm for the Oilers this year. There's just a lot of good hockey teams out there.
Well, there's
just to briefly answer back, I think Edmonton has a superior core to Vegas. They just lost the series. I think they have a superior core to Dallas, but Dallas has advanced. I stand by my comments on the core, and I can expand it to anybody else in the West as far as I'm concerned. Sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right. They got in the NHL five teams with over 110 points, 7 teams with 100 to 109, another 8 teams with 91 to 98. So you got 20 teams with over 90 points. And you guys know, as do I, any game is going to be decided on the bounce of a puck, a call that happens at the wrong moment, a deflection. Really, the margins are so close that the randomness becomes a major player in the outcome of a game or even a series. And you can have 2 sort of equally matched teams, and of course they're going to split 50-50, but you could have one team, significantly better, and it still might split 60-40, or, it's not basketball.
Yeah, this series did come down to a few calls, a few plays. If they go differently, then the series outcome could be different. Because there were significant areas where the Oilers were a lot better than Vegas, and the other way around, to be fair.
But you know what? Would add to what Bruce said. What you can do when you're in a situation like that, where Gary Bettman's NHL today equity is a thing. I completely agree. Well, then you must be able to control what you can control to win. And I think we can all agree there's a few things in the postseason that the Oilers could have controlled better and didn't. And those things arguably cost them the Vegas series.
Indeed. Bruce, what is your good thing?
Yeah, I'm a little bit on a parallel track to Kurt. In fact, I might be the other rail on the same track, but I think the Oilers did take a step forward this year. I think the identity of the team is strengthening. They emerged as the top scoring team in the National Hockey League this year, and by some distance. So 25 goals above Boston, 24 goals, something like that. And they have, and those things, especially that offense, was much, much better in the second half of the season than the first. And so was the defense. And then we're left wondering, well, what happened to it when we're playing against a good 4-line, 3D pair, 25 goalie team like Vegas that, were, legitimately able to walk away with the series. So we won a playoff round for the second year in a row. The last time that happened was in 1997-98 with Ron Lowe at the helm. They beat Dallas Stars on the Cujo save / Todd Marchant goal, famously Game 7 in overtime in Dallas. And then the next year they beat Colorado by scoring the last 9 goals of the series as Cujo completely bamboozled the great Colorado Avalanche of Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg for the last 8 periods of the series. So those were good times, but they were sort of isolated miracles that happened to happen 2 years in a row. It's like getting a great comet 2 years in a row. And you have to wait a long time for the next one. Well, now we finally got it where we've got a team that was able to win the playoffs, not only make the playoffs 2 years in a row, and even that didn't happen for about almost 20 years, but win a playoff series each year. And Jay Woodcroft is just the fourth orders coach to do that.
My good thing is, Kurt's looking at the when you're talking about the core of the team. It's generally speaking older players on the team, and the older veterans are still not. Thankfully, they're still not that old. So just to build on Kurt's point, Ekholm will be 33 start next year. Kane, I think 32. Jack Campbell 31. Zach Hyman 31. Nugent Hopkins 30. Cody Ceci and Brett Kulak, if they're both back, or one of the two of them are back, they'll be 29. Darnell Nurse will be 28. Leon Draisaitl will be 27, and Connor McDavid will be 26. So this is a young team. Its core is not that old. It's not that ancient. So that's really good. But I'm encouraged by the youth wave on the Oilers, and they're going to, we don't know how it's going to be down the road, but in the coming years, they've got some talented players that are just coming into their own. Chief among them is Evan Bouchard. He of the 31 minutes in the last game, who just suddenly looked like maybe a number 1 D-man in the NHL. He wasn't perfect in the playoffs. He made a lot of defensive mistakes, but his offense was out of this world, and he and Ekholm just looked like a true top pairing. One of the best pairings in the league, possibly, for the next maybe couple of years. So that's really encouraging. So Bouchard will be 23 next year. Philip Broberg, who was spotted this year, but I still see is on the same trajectory as Oscar Klefbom, and a player very similar skills to Klefbom, will be 22. Dylan Holloway, who didn't get a sniff in the playoffs, probably should have. He'll be 21. Ryan McLeod, 23. Klim Kostin, 24. Stuart Skinner, 24. So they have this group of young players. Kailer Yamamoto will be 24 next year, and again, we don't know if he'll be back either. But that's a significant number of talented players who are still getting better. I'm going to add to this already good group of forwards. To that list, I would include 2 players, or a few players on the farm. Xavier Bourgault will only be 20 years old at the start of next year, although he'll quickly turn 21. Tyler Tullio will be 21. And Raphael Lavoie, who is a big, hulking, and super aggressive forward who can score a bit. He's kind of like Klim Kostin in a way. Will be 22. So there's talent coming up, and that talent could push the Oilers to the next level. They're going to need these. They're going to need these players because there's going to be injuries every year in the playoffs, and they're going to need players to be able to just step right up and step right in and excel. But I think they've got some good prospects in that regard.
And David, just to support your point, in the salary cap era, the Oilers are going to need a few $1 million or less players in order to make this work. And a few of those young players have the ability to give the organization that. So just to support your point, it's it's going to be key for the organization to get a couple of $1 million players just to make the cap work.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because it's like there's some contracts that are up for Janmark, Bjugstad, and Ryan. Now these are older players. They'll be Bjugstad will be 31, Janmark 30, and Ryan 36 to start next season. And if any of them start asking for too much money, having these younger players gives the Oilers the ability just to say, well, I think we'll take our chances with the guy who's going to make league minimum instead. And I like all of those three players. I wouldn't mind if all three of those guys are back, especially Ryan, who just excelled in the playoffs. But if they can't make the money work, then they can't make the money work, and they just have to go in another direction.
Well, more and more they're getting squeezed on this salary. You can also not only just bring up your own young players at somewhere near the minimum, but you can get a lot of veterans for near or even at the minimum that are pretty good. And there's this big job hunt that goes on in, second half of July right through to training camp of guys trying to sign on somewhere for a year, take a big cut, try and make their way back. Guys signing PTOs, whatever. There's lots of options, and we're even at the point where the $1.25 million salary is. I mean, that cost Matthias Janmark his job in the NHL at the start of the season. He was sent down because he made too much. They had to make cap, and it was either him or Ryan was going to get sent down, and Janmark went down only when Kane got hurt. Did a whole bunch of cap space free up, and then they called him and Costin up, and those guys both made the most of their opportunity, which is at least one development over the season, especially important for Costin because the club still has rights on him, whereas Janmark's UFA again.
Yeah, so I don't know if those guys can get those 1.25 million contracts this summer. They might have to settle for the league minimum if they want to be Oilers, and we'll see how that plays out.
Closer to it, within 375,000 of it is one of the barriers where you can at least send the whole contract down to the minors and not be stuck with any of it.
That's a good point, Bruce.
So you might see, like this year, the minimum goes up to 775, and you might see some come in at 1.15 million. But even that margin makes a difference, right? A guy who makes the minimum has got no obstruction to getting called up or to avoid getting sent down. Devon Shore made $850 and Matthias Janmark made $1,250, and that $400,000 meant Devon Shore made NHL money and in the NHL, and Matthias Janmark got NHL money but down in the minors. So you can bet who was happier, even with the disparity in pay.
All right, let's move on to the bad things. Kurt, lead us off.
I'll lead off with injuries, and that probably seems a little bit like a loser's lament. But I think injuries are a legitimate thing that any team has to deal with. And if you get too many and they start to add up, well, they start to chip away at your effectiveness. And I think you can make that argument for any number of NHL teams this spring. And the evidence is growing that you can add the Oilers to that list. Maybe not number one on the list, but I think significant. First of all, we know that Evander Kane had not just one or two, but three significant injuries this year. We all know about the wrist contusion. I think everybody knows about the broken ribs. Then he played through the playoffs with a broken finger. So, pretty obvious that one of their three best players in the playoffs last year was significantly compromised physically. Turns out Warren Foegele had a hand/wrist issue and practically wasn't able to shoot and practice for the last 2.5 months. So certainly that pulled down his effectiveness as well. It was abundantly clear that Zach Hyman was not 100% in the final 10 games of the season and through the postseason. Even though he put up some decent results, it wasn't the same player that we watched for most of the season. I found it interesting that Hyman wasn't too interested in elaborating on his injury postseason, but hey, that's his business. And you know what? There's almost certainly one or two more that we don't have full details on yet that we'll learn from. But those are three pretty significant pieces. And if any of those guys are at 80%, 70%, 60%, that starts to eat away at the effectiveness of the entire team. Other players less capable start to get more minutes than they maybe should get. end up going into positions they maybe aren't ideally suited for. And at the end of the day, as you say, in these playoff series, every little bit counts. Well, yeah, including if some of your better players, including two of, I'd argue, your best wingers, Hyman and Kane, had
No
significant
argument.
injuries, and I bet you neither one of them were better than 60% in the postseason.
What I'd like to see is a player like, if Costin could have been given a little bit more ice time. Like, I understand he might have been banged up too. Like, if Hyman's not going or Yamamoto's not going, that was one of the things, we're going to get to this, but, why not move somebody up and give them a bit more of an opportunity if your top guy, and I know, like, the injuries weren't nearly as bad. They were far more significant last season when Draisaitl and Nurse were both hurt, and clearly hurt and not close to their former selves in terms of their agility on the ice. That was a much bigger factor. It bothers me in some ways because it looked like the core players were relatively healthy, like the very, elite players on the team, to which I might add Ekholm to the list now. The top three guys plus Ekholm, they all looked really healthy. And that's another frustration, is they couldn't win when those guys were just flying out there. But
I think Jay played them until their tongues hanged out onto the ice. It's I don't think there's any that Leon Draisaitl had a tough game 6. They played the hell out of him. As you know, in my column this past Sunday, I made a case that Jay Woodcroft needed to get more from his entire lineup, that the big guys needed help, and the coach didn't give it to them. Now, maybe he didn't have the healthy number of bodies to do that for them. I don't know. But when you've got 5 Oilers playing less than 6 minutes a game, only 3 for Vegas, and you got 6 Oilers playing more than 23 minutes a night and only 1 for Vegas, well, it stands to reason at some point you're going to run out of gas. And I think to some extent that's what happened.
Bruce, your bad thing.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the state of the Oilers goaltending, and specifically that state as the season came to an end here, with I think probably neither goalie in a very good space, and frankly, likely not Coach Jay Woodcroft as well. But we had the odd situation to me that Stuart Skinner outplayed Jack Campbell significantly during the season, won the starting job and held the starting job. And Jack Campbell didn't measure up by the numbers, which he was quite poor in the regular season, with an .888 save percentage, and come playoff time, it was like the job was Skinner's, and it was going to be Skinner's no matter what. When in fact in the playoffs, Skinner, who started 12 out of 12 games, put up percentage numbers that were worse than Campbell's during the regular season. .883 save percentage, .368 goals against average, which Campbell's I think was 3.41. And I mean, so Skinner's going to be in a bad place in the sense that he got the big opportunity and he didn't quite measure up to the opportunity. And Campbell's going to be in a bad space that he didn't get the opportunity at all. I mean, they brought him in time and again to mop up in games, and time and again he came in and he played well. If you go to NHL stats page and look at the goalies leaders, you'll see Jack Campbell's pictures at the top of the goals against average and save percentage columns, and by wide margins, .961. Now, that was all basically in garbage time, because each time he came in, the Oilers were 3 or 4 goals behind, or certainly given up 4 goals. And Campbell mopped up with it. After Game 5, when Skinner got pulled for the second time in 3 games, I felt sure that Campbell again played well, very well in relief. I think you gave him an 8, David, in Game 5. I thought now he's seized it. This is his turn. And yet that didn't happen in Game 6. So that's what I don't like is where it leaves all these people as they head off into their various summers. And Jay Woodcroft, who made that decision, on the other end of that equation, you have Ken Holland, who was the guy who made Jack Campbell his showcase signing over the course of the summer, and yet not given the chance to come in and save the day when the day pretty clearly needed saving. So all of that, I just don't think any of them's quite in the right place. And hopefully for especially Stu Skinner, he's a very level-headed guy. I saw him interviewed, and he's going to take the positives out of the positive experiences, and he's going to take the positives out of the negative experiences. And he had some, certainly had some of the latter in the playoffs, but he also had, he's a Calder Trophy finalist. He got a nice shiny new contract. He's a dad now. He made the All-Star game. A whole lot went right for that guy, and hopefully he looks back on that. And that's what's going to be his takeaway from this season. But right now, I bet you both those guys are just kind of not in a very happy place, and I'll leave it there.
I think Skinner will be okay. I just heard him today. Like he said, it was his time of his life in these playoffs, and he's just a very level-headed guy. I'm not worried about Skinner's mental state. These are professional athletes, very tough-minded, and Skinner just strikes me as totally tough, like just not a tough cookie, but just a calm guy, super confident guy, calm guy. What worried me in the end, Stoffer's quoted this a couple of times. He only played 6 games in a row in the regular season. Then all of a sudden you went to 12.
Yep.
And that's the whole issue there. It's clear that he got worn down by the playoff experience. And in retrospect, like I was okay with him going with Skinner in game 6. So I'm not going to say anything about that. I was wrong. I think Woodcroft was incorrect as well. But Campbell was shaky all year. In the last playoff, in his first couple playoff appearances, he didn't get scored on, but he also looked shaky. And I am more concerned about Jack Campbell's mental state, but I do think he got a shock this year, and he needs to rebuild his game. He needs to come back. He needs to work. He needs to rethink what he's doing, rethink his psychological approach, or both, and come back and be a better goalie. Because this is a performance-based sport, and he just didn't cut it for me. That's why I was okay with Skinner playing, because I just had no confidence in Campbell. So,
I think both you guys make excellent points, and I think I agree with everything you said. If I could just add to it, I publicly supported the decision to play Stuart Skinner in Game 6. I would have done the same thing, and I said on Twitter all the reasons why I would have, and I don't take that back. What everybody is quite willing to do is say, see, they were wrong. They should have started Jack Campbell. Well, what makes everybody so sure the result would have been so different from Jack Campbell? Jack Campbell is a good human being, a good teammate, and I don't wish him any wrong. But he had chance after chance after chance all season long to prove to the coaching staff that he was the guy, and he blew every bloody chance. To the point where in the playoffs, my read is the coaching staff just didn't trust him in that position anymore. So they danced with the girl that brought him. And they said, we're going to either win or lose with this guy. Well, they did. But I don't disagree with their choice. And I agree with what David said. Jack Campbell has to come back next year and earn that contract, because he didn't this year. Don't mean any disrespect to the guy. I think he's a good guy. Wish him well. But that was a super poor performance that reflects badly on the general manager, frankly, because he's the guy who signed the check. So.
I do like that Campbell actually had a couple positive games. Like in the last couple relief appearances, especially the last one, he finally looked settled. Like he finally looked at home in the net. And I think that gave a lot of impetus to the people who were calling for him, is that he finally looked like, instead of someone who looked rattled, he looked someone who was confident and ready to play well, which he had not looked all year. But he did look that way. So I'm glad in a way that he's got plenty of motivation, but he's also has that little bit of an uplifting experience right at the end of the season, where at least he turned it around a bit. That might give him some hope coming into next year, that if he just keeps working, doing what he's doing, he can turn things around. And I'm starting to hear a little bit of, there's always criticism of the goalie coach after the goalie coach has been around for 6-7 years. Starting to hear that in Edmonton. I am no expert on this. I do know that Sean Burke had all 4 goalies in Vegas playing above their heads. I don't know if he's available or not, but just add that in there. My bad thing. is after having quite a spectacular season as the coach and a strong postseason last year, Jay Woodcroft had, I think, a pretty terrible series against Las Vegas as a coach. And he hasn't, with coaches, I always say they have 9 lives, and you start counting the mistakes they make. And it was pretty hard to start until this time in Woodcroft's career in Edmonton. He hadn't accrued a lot on his list. I don't know if he's burnt off any lives at all until this playoff series, when he's used about 3 or 4 of them, I think. And just being the nature of the beast. The first thing I'm gonna, so there's the Campbell Skinner decision, which Kurt and I both supported. Bruce, you wanted Campbell. The majority of the fans wanted Campbell. So that's one life. That was a big decision, and it's not going to be forgotten. It's going to be raised. And when I say it's a life, it's going to be something raised continually. The second one is the Oilers' line matching, especially in game 6, and it was frankly bizarre. And I don't know what he was thinking. I guess he didn't want. The whole idea was to get McDavid away from the fearsome William Karlsson line, and I was listening to Ryan Rashad's podcast with Jason Strudwick, which is quite excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And Rashad made a good point. McDavid only played 5:21 of the first period. This is the biggest game of the year. Connor McDavid has said we're gonna give our best game. He should have been on the ice 8 minutes of that first period, 9 minutes of that first period. But you don't start the game with him because you want to keep him away from the feared checkers of the feared Karlsson checking line. I didn't see that with Vegas, that line being such a dominant line. The line I was worried a lot about was the Eichel line. In the end, the Jack Eichel was on the ice for 10 even strength goals for, 1 against. He was the dominant even strength player in this series. And who did they have on the line? They had 3 players who are iffy defensive players, at least at this point. Leon Draisaitl, Kailer Yamamoto, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. They would be the last 3. That would be the last line I would have picked to go against, other than the 4th line would have picked. And yet they were out there, and they got whipped at even strength. And there was 2 goals against in the second period because of defensive lapses, partly by the forwards, partly by the D-men out there, the whole unit. So that decision just befuddled me. Like, why wouldn't you have the McDavid and McLeod line going against Eichel? And why? So out of all these TV commercial timeouts, Cassidy's happy to put Karlsson on the ice because he knows, hey, that means no Connor McDavid. Brilliant, he's thinking. What is Woodcroft thinking? I don't get it. What was he thinking? And, why not have McDavid against Eichel? Connor McDavid can take on anybody. He is the best player in the world, and he is a solid defensive player at this point. He has a fundamental understanding, I think, of his role in the defensive zone. And he was not used, and we have the result that we have.
I think McDavid would have welcomed the challenge of the one-on-one against Eichel and probably upped even his defensive game a little bit. And, you're not going to beat me there, hole number 2, And anyway, we just never really saw it. And it was either Bukestad against Eichel, which was a disaster, or else it was Draisaitl against Eichel, which was also a disaster. I mean, when you think of it, Eichel was on the ice for 10 goals for Vegas at even strength. The Oilers as a team scored 9 goals as even strength in the entire series. So Vegas's defensive system seemed to work a lot better than Edmonton's.
I had 2 points. One, I think it comes down to speed. If you look at the numbers through the series, the 2 Oilers centers who were having the best success against Jack Eichel were Connor McDavid and Ryan McLeod. Hello, the 2 fastest centers on the team. Like, it just doesn't seem like it takes a rocket scientist to figure that out. And the other thing that befuddles me about it is, was Jay Woodcroft the only person in the world who thought that the Oilers' problem was not enough offense? didn't everybody agree that the problem in the series was they were giving up too much? I'm with you. I would have said best on best. Here, beat Connor McDavid. See if you can do it. That would have been a way better matchup. I don't go against Jay on the goaltending decision as I outlined, but I thought his line matching in Game 6 was abysmal.
As soon as I saw it and I was at the game, I just felt, honestly, I felt sick. I just thought, what is he thinking? What is he doing? Like, who does that? And you know what? I guess he thought that Leon would rise to the occasion, which is a possibility, right? Like, but it's just, you know, Leon's fundamental defense hasn't been there all year. He's not that player. And Nugent Hopkins and Yamamoto, they were slumping badly in the playoffs. Nuge was just having a hell of a time getting anything done. What made him think this was going to work? I mean, it's definitely one of his lives. It's not going to be forgotten by anybody, any Oiler fans. And what I'd add to it is this: Jonathan Marchessault made a comment after the game that the Vegas knew Oilers play man-to-man defensively in their zone, and they had the strategy to beat it. And I'm going to go over the videotape and have a closer look at this because I'm a little bit curious about what Vegas does differently in playing a zone. But what we saw repeatedly, I think, was Vegas the forwards moving from below the goal line out to the blue line in the offensive end, sometimes out of the blue line. And what that did was continually drag the Oilers defensemen, who are one-on-one, Darnell Nurse and Cody Ceci and other players, dragged them right out, way out of position. And what that left was a forward, sometimes a really small forward like Kailer Yamamoto, covering the slot. And if you're Vegas, you're thinking, who would I rather have covering the defensive slot? Little Kailer Yamamoto or Leon Draisaitl, who tends to wander around, or big Darnell Nurse or Cody Ceci? The answer is simple. And what we saw on the second and third goals was Leon Draisaitl covering the front of the net, and Ceci out at the point on one, and Nurse. I don't know where Nurse was. So
I think both of them were out at the point on one.
Yeah, they're just the Oilers were dragged all over the ice by this, I think, purposeful high motion offense that the Knights brought in. Maybe they do this all the time against man on man, like when they get man on man teams. Maybe it's constantly, but either Woodcroft has to teach that defensive system better to players, and they have got to listen more attentively after this brutal, painful lesson against Vegas, or Woodcroft has to change that system to one that his players can handle and understand. And I don't, one where it's more of a zone where the defenders don't come way out to the blue line. They switch off and they stay in front of the net or in the corner. It's more simple in that regard. But this didn't work. They got whipped, and this is part of the reason they got whipped at even strength.
Yeah, who was it who went around Yamamoto? Maybe Mark Stone. It was a big, high-skilled guy, and he just made mincemeat out of him in the slot because, Yamamoto tried to cover whoever it was because both D-men got sucked over to the boards or out to the blue line or whatever, and it was never going to end well, and it didn't.
Well, in the second Vegas goal, the goal that tied it up in Game 6, I just have this image of Marchessault charging in from the blue line down the center of the ice. And initially, Nugent Hopkins has him, but then Nuge gives him off to Draisaitl, Leon doesn't see him, and then Marchessault is wide open for the tip pass from, I think it was Eichel, from the point shot. And it's just this system. It's got way too many it has way too many breakdowns. There's way too many players open for wide open shots. There has been all year long in the defensive slot. And my go-to has been to blame the players constantly for this. Maybe the coach needs to understand the players, what players he has and their limitations and what they can and can't do. You can keep pushing people to do things that they're not very good at, or maybe you change your system a little bit. And I don't honestly have the answer about what the correct answer is there. Maybe it's a bit of both. But the Oilers were a terrible defensive team when they needed to stop the other team when they had a lead. They were consistently atrocious on defense. They just gave up goals repeatedly when they had the lead. They couldn't hold it. Anytime were you guys ever confident in this series when they got up 2-1, 3-1? It was always like, oh no, here it goes again. Just that feeling like we can't hold a lead, this team. And until part of that's on the goaltending, obviously. But until they can do that, they can't win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, well, oftentimes they couldn't hold the lead for 1 minute. They scored the first goal in 3 of the first 5 games. And in 2 of them, it was tied within 1 minute. And the third one, it was tied within 2 minutes. And all 3 times Vegas went on to win those games because the Oilers could never consolidate. Even, you'd like to get, a full cycle of lines go through and that scoreboard stick there at 1-0, and then maybe you add to it, as opposed to, oh, they scored, we better get that one back, bam, and it's in the net. And mind you, Game 6 happened exact opposite. So, and that didn't help the Oilers in the end either.
Yeah, I say all this fully realizing that Jay Woodcroft has forgotten more about NHL defense than I will ever know in my life, and that he is the expert. And I'm sure they've been over I'm sure they're pulling out their own hair and thinking about this, brainstorming about this, talking about this, trying to figure this out. But it's apparent that what's happened to date it's not yet working. I don't know if it is. Maybe they've tried different things in their system. Maybe they'll try the Swarm next. But it'll be interesting to see where this goes. I just seeing their players. I just love it when Darnell Nurse is playing in front of that net, sticking in front of the net, and then going to the corner when the puck's in his corner, not running around all over the place. I just think he can be such a fantastic defenseman when that is his modus operandi. Yeah. So that's part of it. I just think they're not. I'm not sure that this system matches this group of players, Nurse in particular, who is such a key part of the team. And I don't see the value of him chasing players out to the blue line. I don't get it. And I also noticed like Vegas did a much better job of cutting off like shots from the outside from the points. Edmonton couldn't get those shots in, and Vegas was more able to do so. They scored on a couple of the dreaded Californians, the point shot that was deflected in or tipped to someone else and goes in, and we couldn't get that kind of greasy goal. And so whatever the Vegas was doing on their defensive system, Jay Woodcroft, watch that. Take a really good look at that and think maybe that suits our players. Maybe there's something there that we should do. And what's that about imitation being the best part of flattery? Flatter Cassidy, steal his system, and beat him with it next year.
One of my visions that will linger from this series is Nicholas Hague, of all people, scoring the game-winning goal in the 4-3 game 5 that turned the series, firing a big floater from the blue line that went by Kyle Yamamoto, Evan Bouchard, Matthias Ekholm, and Stu Skinner, all of whom were in the shooting lane. And somehow the puck eluded all 4 guys and found the top corner of the Oilers' net. And of course, Skinner never saw it. He took a lot of grief he just did the old shrug my shoulders. What the hell happened? And people say he's showing up as defenseman, but come on. He's shrugging his shoulders in disbelief. What happened? Anyways, that one will linger. I mean, Nicholas Hague could probably take that shot another few hundred times before he makes it again. Let's put it that way.
Kazari's arm in the air on a play that he didn't see with Philip Broberg is going to be the image that stays in my head. That was a jackass call. All right. What is your number, Kurt?
17. The Oilers were 17th in the NHL this season in goals against. So if you decided the top 16 seeded teams based on goals against, the Oilers would miss the postseason. We all know these guys should score, and this is always going to be an offensive team.
Yep.
They're never going to be a defensive team, but you can't be 17th in the NHL in goals against and expect to win. You can't give up the volume of goals that the Oilers gave up in the playoffs and hope to win the Stanley Cup. They have to do a combination of things. They have to shore up the defensive aspect of their roster. That's mostly doing a little bit around the edges because most of the roster is locked in. They do need to do a better job of defending in their own zone. Everybody just has to be more detailed. They're not there yet, and it's obvious. But my number one thing on defense is they have to play less in their own zone. This is an offensive team. The best way for them to limit chances against is to be on the attack. One of the things I saw when the Oilers, as you rightly pointed out, couldn't hold a lead is the Oilers would get a lead and they'd start to sit back. Well, I'm sorry, this roster isn't built to sit back. They're built to attack. And there's such a thing as attacking in a responsible way. Lots of NHL teams do it. The Oilers are the perfect candidate for that style of play. But unless they climb from 17th to, probably 10th or better, I'm just not sure they'll get over the hump. I think they can get there, but they're going to need to make some roster tweaks. They're going to need to set their minds to it. And the players and the coach are going to have to understand how that roster is comprised and how best to use it to limit goals against. And of course, the goaltending. They were behind the 8 ball from the word go because the starter, who was supposed to be the starter, never was. End of story.
Yeah, and as you say, that's on Ken Holland.
Yeah.
Bruce, your number.
Yeah, I'm going to go with number 153. And just as a way of a backdrop, I'm not one who, obviously what happens at the end of the playoffs, how a team season comes to an end, is a defining thing about that season. So any season that doesn't end with the Stanley Cup is in one sense or another a failure. You didn't win the Stanley Cup. Whether you went out in the second round of the playoffs, third round of the playoffs, whether you finished 30th out of a 30-team league and picked first overall, there's different measures of failure and success for that matter. The latter is a success for a rebuilding team. Anyways, the one season maybe that was most defined by failure in Edmonton, or by playoff failure in Edmonton Oilers history, was 1986 against Calgary Flames, when they lost the Battle of Alberta in the middle of their otherwise four in a row Stanley Cups from 84 to 88. And yet I look back at that season and I think that wasn't a failure. I mean, the Oilers had 119 points. They won President's Trophy by a wide margin. They won the scoring championship. Paul Coffey set what's still the all-time record for 48 goals. Wayne Gretzky set what's still the all-time record with 163 assists and 215 points. There's a lot of nice things to remember about that season, even as that crushing failure is kind of what you remember at the end of it. Well, this year, it hurts. I was expecting this team to go deep this year, and I'm very disappointed with especially the manner of the last couple of losses. But looking back at the season, and you look at Connor McDavid, 153 points, not quite Gretzkyan, but he won the scoring championship by 25 points, which I believe is the largest margin in the current century. And the fact is that he won the margin over his line mate Leon Draisaitl, 128 points, which tied the previous mark for the most points in a season this century. McDavid had 25 more points this year than any player has in the last 25 years. So dominant was his season, and so dominant was Draisaitl's season that as a hockey fan, we have a lot to be thankful for. We've got an interesting team to watch. It's frustrating. It'll piss you off. They'll lose games that they should win, but man, do they deliver on the entertainment front. This year's devastating power play was such a joy to watch, another record breaker. And so I take positive things away. I still think they're building. There's finally a real evidence of a build. Now, it's 4 years in a row in the playoffs under Ken Holland, 2 years advancing past the first round, and the core of the team's going to stay intact. But, I mean, let's start with that 153-point guy, Connor McDavid, 26 years old and dominating the league, and it's future's pretty bright. Whereas, what team was it this year I heard that had their first 30 goal scorer in 10 years. Can you imagine? I think maybe it was Arizona or anyway. Can you imagine being a season ticket holder for that team?
Well, we went through the
Compared to
decade
here?
of darkness, so I can imagine it. Yes,
Well,
I can
even then
imagine
we
it.
had the odd, I
Yeah,
mean,
we had some
I
good
think
players.
Dustin Penner had a good season in there somewhere.
Dale Yakupov. Yeah. Hope. Yeah.
Yeah, we had hope, all
We
right.
we do have a fantastic team to watch, Bruce. We are
Yeah,
so fortunate.
be
And
thankful.
yeah, and this core, we have a lot of PTSD in Edmonton because every great player has moved on from Edmonton
Yep.
before, and that may not happen with it might happen with McDavid and Dressel. It may not, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is their I think that this team is building, is getting better, and this is the best place that they have the chance both to all of these friends to play together and win a Stanley Cup together, which
My
is
God,
what is life
that's
about?
big.
What is life about? Like it is, some people it's
That's
all about
big.
making the money, right? And maybe there's going to be an opportunity for players to make significantly more money in other seasons, teams, and that could break up the orders. But it's not that NHL. And I think for the key players, the others will be able to pay Draisaitl and McDavid what they need to pay them, whatever it takes, in order to keep them here. So I do think it is big. This idea we're hearing about Austin Matthews looking at re-upping in Toronto now, and I do think that's important for a lot of players. If you can create an environment, a hockey environment that they like, and just being together with your buddies and your friends, I mean, that's
Mhm.
significant in life. And I think it's as likely, if not a far more likely outcome than this team falling apart in a couple of years with the good players, the superstars leaving. So we might actually be doubly blessed in that we have them here for this early part of their career, but maybe we'll see them throughout their careers and see how this goes. It is kind of a magical team in a lot of ways, and we're frustrated with them right now. But man, what we saw in the power play this year was
Oh,
was it was
and in the
it was
playoffs, holy.
it was marvelous. It was hypnotic. It was mesmerizing. It was a thing of beauty to see that power play move the puck. There was the one I can't remember. It ended up with Nugent Hopkins taking an outside shot that was deflected and McDavid put it in from the side of the net. But it had been like I think about 90 seconds of just incredible passing, shooting, winning the puck, ending up in a goal from this power play. But it wasn't unusual. It happened again and again. My number, though, unfortunately, is I just want to. The Oilers did get more grade A shots than Vegas, 93 to 76. That is a considerable number more grade A shots, and it speaks to the goaltending issue that developed during this series, especially in the end with Aiden Hill having such a great game at the end. But at even strength, and this is where we get to the problem that we've discussed at length ad nauseum in this podcast. When it comes to the very best shots, the 5 alarm shots that go in about 33% of the time, it was 31 for Vegas and 21 for the Oilers. So that was a significant edge in this one part of the game. And if you can even that out, Edmonton Oilers, and get decent goaltending, it's not massive. Obviously, it's not massive change that the Oilers need, which is lucky because all their players are locked in on contracts. It's going to be harder and harder to make changes in some ways. But they do need to make some change, and they need to grow out of this. And I still think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen, and I'm looking forward to next season. Final thoughts?
I'll offer up a final thought. I think I've extracted my pound of flesh from Jay Woodcroft today. Let me say this, though. I think Jay Woodcroft is an incredibly smart guy and a very coach who has done nothing but experience, learn, apply, and advance throughout his career up until this point. There is everything on his resume to suggest that he will go to school on this experience and be the better for it. So while I'm quite willing and able to criticize his performance in the postseason this year, when I look over the body of work of Jay Woodcroft, I've got confidence going forward that he is the right coach for this team. And this learning experience has the potential to turn into something much better for him down the road.
I'm with you, Kurt. And I mean, I look at Jay Woodcroft now. He's been in the league for 15 months, regular season, 120 games played, 76, 32, and 12. And I think that's tied with Carolina behind Boston for the best in the entire league since he got called up. Now in the playoffs, 14 wins, 14 losses, but as mentioned before, at least one playoff series victory in each season. And to me, he's got a very positive record right now. And the fact that his season comes to an end just when the spotlight is on him in a negative way is going to make it a bit of a long summer for him. But I think he's pretty secure, unless Ken Holland's pissed at him for not using his number one signing last July 1st in the playoffs. I think one of Holland's best moves that he's made so far is bringing up Woodcroft and then extending him. I think that's turned his franchise in a very positive direction, and it's a big part of the reason why I remain positive about the shorter term now future.
Yeah, I mean I just wrote a Vegas commentator has ripped Jay Woodcroft, but
Fire him.
and I wrote a post on it, but and he's echoing many of the things that are said in Edmonton. But this guy's saying you should fire him. You need a veteran coach like Cassidy. You know, we've had that veteran coach thing. We had McClellan, Hitchcock, and Tippett. Jay Woodcroft has gotten more out of this group than any of those more veteran coaches. I think he's the right. I really think he is the right coach for this group, and he's going to grow. I completely agree with you. He's going to grow out of this experience and be a much better coach next year. And he's going to figure this out and get this team going. And I think between them, Campbell and Skinner can figure it out too. Like Skinner was a really good goalie this year through the regular season. He got worn out in the playoffs. End of story. Simple as that. Campbell, he after 5 pretty good years as a pro NHL goalie, 5 good decent years, his game fell apart. This happens with goalies in the NHL all the time, and they bounce back. Who's the Florida goalie this year? Where was he?
Bobrovsky.
Where was he a year or two ago? Like he's been up and down, up and down. Jack Campbell can figure this out and come back. So I'm actually not that pessimistic about the goaltender. Like some people are talking about buying out Campbell already and moving on. Like, are you serious? No, if we get another year like this, that will be in the discussion. But come on, we got to see this guy at least one more year and see what he can do, because I think he can bounce back. And he did have a good streak of games in January where he looked like he'd solved the problem and was confident again and good in the net, sound in the net, at home in the net. He's just got to find that home again for himself, and I think he will.
Yeah, well, it's kind of reminiscent of, well, we've seen this situation often. We've had the cheaper of a 2 goalie system be the number one. Mike Smith had signed 3 different contracts here that were all like half price or less of what Mikko Koskinen was earning on an annual basis, with Peter Chiarelli's last hurrah just before he got fired in 2019. But before that, I mean, we had a long situation where Devin Dubnyk was the understudy to Nikolai Habibulin until he started looking at stats like games played and started and so on, where Dubnyk gradually took over as the number one, even though he was by some distance the lower paid. Now we have both Skinner and Campbell on the books for at least the next 3 years at 2.6 and 5 million respectively, and the Oilers' history itself says it'll probably be the lower paid guy who gets more of the work. And it's just kind of business as usual. It seems like a bit of a sad situation. I personally am hoping, well, hard for both guys. Jack Campbell, there's more there. He had a tough time of it. I mean, he got to play behind the Oilers' defense, and as we've been discussing, that's not always the best deal. They got lots of goal support, and he used it to win a lot of games. So
I have one more suggestion. How about a quick survey from each of the 3 of us? Who's the one Oiler least likely to return next year?
Well, okay. Do you have a name in mind, Kurt? Do you want to start?
I do. I think it's
Go ahead. Cutter Yamamoto. Yeah.
A lot of time for Kyler Yamamoto. I think he works hard. I think he's a smart player, hunts pucks. But he is a bottom six player making top six money. And in the salary cap era, I don't think you can do that anymore. And the risk to injury is too great.
But so how do they get rid of him, Kurt? Because then you think another team will trade for him?
Trade him for a pick.
Buy him out. He's under 27. He's under 26, pardon me. So he's only a 1/3 of his salary split out over 2 seasons. So you could buy him out for 500,000 change cap hit for 2 years, which, it's a pain, but it's not like this huge whopping value like the James Neal contract, for example. You've got so if you can't find a taker for him, rather than throwing in a big draft pick to download the contract, just bite the bullet and take the 500K cap hit for 2 years, and you work around it.
If that's your second option, yeah.
I'd rather trade him, obviously, and I think you could. So yeah, I think obviously that's choice number one.
You're going to get a second or a third for him, right?
That's fine.
Yeah. Chicago needs some NHL players now that they have Connor Bedard. They can't do what they did this past year. They need NHLers. They need a lot of NHLers. And Kyler Yamamoto and one of the Oilers defensemen, Cody Ceci, I could see them heading to Chicago. Quite honestly, that's a team that needs players and NHLers, and they're both NHLers. There's no doubt about that. So my pick, I don't know how keen they are on moving Cody Ceci. And if they do move Cody Ceci, it would mean moving Philip Broberg to his offside, or Kulak to his offside, which I think either players, they're such fantastic skaters they can handle. I would have guessed that Kulak would have been traded this summer before the playoffs, but Kulak was outstanding for the second year in the row in the playoffs. It has to count for something. Now, the other thing they're factoring in, Cody Ceci all year long played the toughest competition. He was injured, had a groin injury all year, most of the year fighting that. He was really good the year before. And maybe they're thinking, we don't actually want to get rid of Cody Ceci. Like he can get healthy and he can be a really good player for us. And we're going to bring back the same 7 defensemen, and we're going to count on, we'll have an injury probably. And Philip Broberg will get his chance that way, or he'll beat out Desharnais, or, we'll just do it that way. But they might want the cap space from either Kulak or Ceci. So I could see, my bet is, I'm not sure, but I think it's a real possibility. Ceci will be on the move because of that. And I hate to say that because I think he's a hell of a sound positional defender. He's a really good hockey player who was in a super tough role on the Edmonton Oilers and has been a really good player. But that's why other teams are going to want him. He's a good player at his price tag. And I think you could get a draft pick for Cody Ceci. Like
I do too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's your spirit Oiler, David.
He is. That's right. If you're not familiar with that term, Kurt, it's when you're a beer league player, it's the player on the Oilers who most resembles the game you play on your beer league team. Is your spirit Oiler, and that's for me. It's Cody Ceci. For my wife, it's Kyler Yamamoto. So we're going to get rid of both our spirit Oilers here.
They traded my spirit Oiler. That would have been Tyson Barrie.
Yeah.
That's great, Kurt. I don't think they can with Yamamoto. I think they've got one too many small forwards. You can have Derek Ryan on the team next year. You can have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins on the team next year, but you can't have 3 of them. I don't think. It's just size matters in the playoffs. How many small forwards did Vegas have, for instance? I didn't notice a lot. Marchessault's not big, I guess, but anyway. Bruce, who are you picking?
Yeah, I'm picking between the same 2 guys they had to pick between at the top of the season, the $1.25 million forwards, Derek Ryan and Mattias Janmark. And I'm picking Derek Ryan to stay, and Mattias Janmark as being the guy that's going to make his way on to his next destination. I think he was pretty good. He was a proven NHLer, came in and was given a role down the lineup, and he didn't make the team for reasons. But when he did, he was the top penalty killer by minutes, and yet he left me I was left wanting for at least a little bit more offense out of the guy. And also in the last two games against Vegas, I thought he had like poor two games, and he took a really, really, really costly penalty in Game 5 that he went into the box with Oilers leading 2-1, and he came out with Oilers trailing 3-2. And that was a big turning point in that game. And I don't think his coach was too happy with him because he stapled him to the bench after that, and he played very little in the last game. And I just think they'll just each think it's time to try it. It's time for a second opinion, as Craig McTavish famously said, although in Janmark's case, it'd be more like a fourth or a fifth opinion by now.
I would hate to see him go personally. I think he's their best penalty killer at forward. And he took a slap shot against the Kings and then was never the same in the playoffs. I think it's recency bias, frankly, against Janmark, that he had a bad playoff because he was injured. I just thought in the regular season, he was solid checker, solid two-way player at even strength, and great on the penalty kill. I hope he's back, but you may well be right, Bruce.
It's a guess. I mean, Kurt took my first choice, which would have been Yamamoto. So, and it may just be who's willing to come back at a lower price. And if they can sign Derek Ryan for a 1-year extension at $1 million, say, and it might even be less than that, the way the market is crunching down on these lower tier players with all of the excess money being paid to the Stars, that if he says, yeah, I'm where I want to be, and I've made a bunch of money in my career already, and another $1 million sounds great to play with this team. And he was such a good fit, man. He had a great playoffs. I love Derek Ryan's play in the playoffs.
Yep, I'm with you. So long as none of those players take away minutes from Dylan Holloway next season.
Gotcha.
And they shouldn't. I mean, that's where he should take Yamamoto's job. Should go to Dylan Holloway. That's the obvious fit. Yep. And then I just think Holland likes his graybeards. I could see Bjugstad, Janmark, and Ryan all coming back. Because I think they're all useful role players. I can see Devon Shore being the guy out and Janmark kind of taking that role. But I agree with you, Bruce, and that it does come down to who's going to take the contract for, the $1.1 million or less.
Well, and Bjugstad with 17 goals, I can see him getting 1.5, 1.6 somewhere else.
Bjugstad, yeah.
And that might just be a bridge too far for this franchise.
I think so. Yeah,
they just don't have the space. They're going to have to sign a bunch of sub $1 million contracts. So a guy like Bjugstad, I thought he delivered great for especially the cap hit. But when they started using him in the top 6 as the playoffs went along, I thought he got exposed a little bit in this Vegas series. And again, they'll have to, it's different how you're building a team in September versus that last piece you're looking for in a trade deadline. And as a last piece, I thought it was a decent bet.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's what they might be looking for again next year. The deadline is that last piece, and it will be that kind of forward again. All right, gents.
With half retained, David.
With half retained.
Ken Holland has his ways.
He's a smart guy. All right. Thanks for talking, everyone.
Great to see you guys.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.